The member for Thornhill.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I wish we didn't have to all be still talking about trying to convince parents to vaccinate their children. I think that a decade ago, it wasn't so difficult, but over the last, I guess, 8 or 9 years, it's been very difficult to convince the parents that, yes, vaccines are safe. We're hearing stories of parents who had embarked on a program of vaccination for their children because they had been convinced, but they hadn't yet been able to complete, because we all know that you can't suddenly give all the vaccinations at one time, and their children contracted measles or rubella. So it is heartbreaking when we think about medical professionals, people who graduated medical school, who had to retract their studies. They did fraudulent studies, which convinced many in the communities, parents and celebrities, unfortunately, jump on the bandwagon, to convince parents that there's a connection between autism and vaccines. And I'm reminded of, sort of my husband will always say, well, that's an association, not a causation, and he's a physician, Mr. Speaker. And it reminds me of his favorite example is that people who have jacuzzis have more heart attacks. Well, it doesn't mean that if you get rid of your jacuzzi, you're going to have a lower incidence of heart attacks. It just means that there is an association between jacuzzis and maybe a sedentary lifestyle, a more affluent, going to restaurants more often lifestyle, and it is not a cause of the heart attacks. And I think that it's our job here as legislators, again, to serve the people who elected us, who put us here, to explain the science, not to focus on the political science, not to just create legislation to force people to do things, but to have people understand the science behind vaccination, to understand that it's about being part of a community and doing what's helpful to your community. That there are people we've heard who are in the community who cannot be vaccinated, and it means that everybody who can be vaccinated must be vaccinated. We can all do better. I remember when the chickenpox vaccine came out, because that was sort of in my time as a parent, that my 2 older children had the chickenpox, but my 2 younger children had the chickenpox vaccine, and so I considered myself a little micro-study in whether or not you should give your children the chickenpox vaccine, and I know people who had chickenpox as an adult, and it's not pretty and it's not comfortable, Mr. Speaker, and I think you'll agree with me on that. So Japan started with the chickenpox vaccine about 10 years before us, and we were a little slow to jump on the bandwagon. But what I want to remind everybody, it's not just about it's not convenient to have children have the chickenpox, although I'll say it was a pleasure not to have to deal with it 2 more times. It's that chickenpox, the vaccine for chickenpox, is also the same vaccine for shingles, and it's a real problem in our communities. Elderly parents, immunocompromised people, pregnant people who end up getting shingles, and it can be very damaging to themselves and an unborn fetus. So we can do better, and we will do better. And I'm reminded because the Associate Minister of Health and Long-Term Care spoke about polio, and I'm reminded of a great aunt I had who was what we call a chalutz. It's somebody who helped create the State of Israel, and her name was Rochel, which means Rachel, and she had polio, and she had the special shoe which had like a 6-inch platform and the hip that didn't work properly. And yes, it didn't stop her in her life, and yes, she did manage to have some children and adopt some children, but what a struggle her life was because of that. And yes, like the Associate Minister said, she didn't complain, but that doesn't mean that within she didn't have those struggles. So I hope that everybody here does their part in their community to, maybe we can go and speak when those meetings are held at local hospitals to convince people to ensure that their children are properly vaccinated, to not listen to the sort of internet scientists, I guess you can call them, who think they know what they're talking about, and we all know they don't, and to instead immunize their children, and maybe to create that proper registry, as we heard from the NDP member, to create that proper registry so that people can easily go on and ensure that maybe they're divorced, that their ex-spouse is indeed vaccinating their children, not just telling them they have, that they can actually track it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I really think it's an important topic.
Thank you very much.